She was taken against her will and forced to marry a feared Lakota warrior, silent, distant, and broken by tragedy. But as she begins to see glimpses of the man behind the mask, everything changes. What if the one person she feared most is the one who needs her the most? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The wagon train had been crawling across the endless plains for 6 weeks when everything changed. Emma Clark gripped the wooden seat as the wheels jolted over another rut, her knuckles white beneath the dust that coated everything. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the canvas cover, turning the interior into an oven. She wiped her brow with a handkerchief that had long since lost its whiteness, her green eyes scanning the horizon with growing unease. "Keep moving," her father's voice barked from horseback alongside the wagon. Thomas Clark was a hard man, made harder by the death of his wife 2 years prior. He had dragged Emma from their comfortable life in Boston with promises of land and opportunity in Oregon, but she suspected he simply wanted to escape the memories that haunted their old home. Emma was 22. With auburn hair she kept tied back in a practical bun, and a face that her mother used to say was made for better things than frontier life. She had spent her youth learning to play piano, studying literature, and attending social gatherings. Now her hands were calloused from cooking over open fires, and her dresses were stained with the residue of prairie dust and wood smoke. The attack came without warning. One moment the train was plodding along in peaceful monotony, the next the air filled with war cries that made Emma's blood run cold. Lakota warriors appeared as if materializing from the earth itself, their painted faces fierce in the afternoon light, their horses moving with supernatural grace across the grassland. "Indians!" someone screamed, and the wagon train erupted into chaos. Emma's father wheeled his horse around, reaching for the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Emma, get down!" he shouted, but his words were lost in the cacophony of gunfire and screaming. She dove to the floor of the wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. The battle was brief, but brutal. The settlers were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Emma heard her father's rifle crack once, twice, then nothing. When she finally dared to peek through the canvas, she saw him lying motionless in the grass, his horse galloping away in terror. Strong hands seized her, pulling her from the wagon. She fought with everything she had, screaming and clawing, but the warrior who held her was impossibly strong. He subdued her without apparent effort, binding her wrists with leather cord while speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Through her tears, Emma saw that several other women and children had been taken captive. The wagons were being ransacked, supplies loaded onto Lakota horses. Bodies lay scattered across the prairie, and she forced herself to look away from where her father had fallen. The warrior who had captured her was younger than the others, perhaps in his late 20s. He was tall and powerfully built, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that were dark and unreadable. His face bore paint in black and white patterns, and despite her terror, Emma couldn't help but notice the stark beauty of his features, the strong line of his jaw, the broad shoulders that spoke of incredible strength. He lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness, mounting behind her. When she tried to struggle, he spoke a single word in a tone that brooked no argument. She didn't understand the language, but the meaning was clear enough. "Be still." The ride to the Lakota camp took most of the afternoon. Emma's mind raced with terror about what awaited her. She had heard stories, whispered tales of what happened to white women taken by Indians, and each one filled her with dread. The camp was larger than she had expected. Dozens of teepees arranged in careful order near a river that cut through the grassland. People emerged to watch as the war party returned with their captives and plunder. Emma saw women and children, old men and warriors, all staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The warrior who had captured her dismounted and pulled her down from the horse. An older man approached, his face weathered and wise, eagle feathers woven into his gray hair. He wore a magnificent headdress that marked him as someone of great importance. The two men spoke in their language, their tone serious, while Emma stood trembling, unable to understand a word. Then the older man turned to her and spoke in halting English. "I am Chief Mahpia. This is Lakota, my nephew. He is great warrior, very brave. But his wife died bringing child into world. Child died too. His heart is dark since then. He does not speak anymore, only in battle. Emma stared at the chief, then at Lakota, who stood with his arms crossed, his face an impassive mask. Silent, the man who had captured her was mute by choice. "You will be his wife," the chief continued, and Emma's world tilted. "This is our way. You replace what he has lost. You will learn our customs, our language. You will bear him strong sons." "No," Emma gasped, finding her voice at last. "No, please, I can't, I won't. You can't force me to marry him. Please, just let me go. I'll find another wagon train, I'll go back east. I won't tell anyone what happened here." Chief Mapia's expression didn't change. "You stay. This is decided. Lakota needs wife, you need protection. Without husband in our village, you will suffer much. Other warriors will think you are free for taking. With Lakota, you are safe. He is good man, even if his heart is wounded." Emma looked at Lakota again, searching his face for some hint of mercy, some sign that he might refuse this arrangement. But his dark eyes gave nothing away. He simply stared at her with that same unreadable expression, silent as stone. "Please," she whispered, but she already knew it was futile. That evening, a ceremony was held. Emma understood none of it, only that at the end, she was considered married to this silent warrior who had captured her. She was given traditional clothing to wear, soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork, and led to Lakota's teepee. The interior was neat and sparsely furnished. Buffalo robes were arranged for sleeping, weapons hung on the walls, and a small fire pit occupied the center. Emma stood near the entrance, her whole body shaking with fear and exhaustion. Lakota entered behind her and secured the entrance. Then he simply pointed to one side of the teepee and made a gesture that clearly meant, "You sleep there." He moved to the opposite side and began removing his weapons and paint, washing his face in water from a leather container. Emma watched him warily, expecting at any moment that he would turn on her, would force himself on her as she had been taught to fear. But he did nothing of the sort. He simply prepared for sleep, then lay down on his robes and closed his eyes, turning his back to her. She stood frozen for a long moment, unable to process this turn of events. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, she sank down onto the robes that had been designated as hers and pulled a buffalo hide over herself. Sleep seemed impossible, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes, she slipped into unconsciousness. The next morning, Emma woke to find Lakota already gone. An older woman entered the teepee, introducing herself through gestures and broken English as Winona. She brought food and began teaching Emma the basics of life in the camp, showing her how to prepare meals, tan hides, and gather water from the river. Days turned into weeks. Emma learned quickly, driven by the need to survive. She began to pick up words of the Lakota language, finding that Winona was a patient teacher. The other women in the camp gradually accepted her presence, though some remained cold and distant. Lakota was a mystery. He came and went from their shared teepee but never spoke, never touched her, never acknowledged her presence beyond ensuring she had food and protection. At night, he slept on his side of the dwelling while she remained on hers, an invisible wall between them more impenetrable than any physical barrier. Emma found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. She saw how the other warriors respected him, how children ran to him with laughter despite his silence. She saw how he cared for his horse with gentle hands, how he provided meat for the elderly who had no one to hunt for them. Whatever darkness lived in his heart, it hadn't made him cruel. One evening, about a month after her capture, Emma was preparing their meal when Lakota returned from a hunt. He carried a deer across his shoulders, his muscular frame barely showing the strain of the weight. He deposited the carcass outside and entered the teepee, his eyes briefly meeting hers before looking away. Emma had made a stew using the techniques Winona taught her, and the smell filled the small space with savory warmth. She ladled some into a bowl and offered it to Lakota, her hands trembling slightly. He took it without acknowledgement, but as he ate, she thought she detected the smallest hint of approval in his expression. "Thank you," she said softly in Lakota, using one of the phrases she had learned. "For bringing food, for protecting me." Dakota's eyes flickered to her face, surprise evident for just a moment before his mask slipped back into place. He didn't respond, but something in the air between them shifted, like the first breath of wind before a storm. Winter arrived early on the plains that year, bringing with it fierce winds and snow that transformed the landscape into an endless expanse of white. Emma had never experienced cold like this, the kind that seeped into your bones and made every breath feel like inhaling shards of ice. The teepee, however, proved warmer than she had expected, the buffalo hides providing insulation against the brutal elements. As the weather worsened, the entire camp drew inward, families huddling together for warmth and survival. Emma found herself spending more time with Lakota in their shared space, the close quarters making it impossible to maintain the careful distance they had preserved during the warmer months. One particularly savage night, the wind howled like a living thing, threatening to tear the teepee from its moorings. Emma lay shivering beneath her robes, her teeth chattering despite the fire Lakota carefully maintained. She tried to be quiet, not wanting to disturb him, but the cold was relentless. She heard movement across the teepee and tensed, expecting nothing. But then Lakota was there, standing over her with an extra buffalo robe in his hands. He gestured for her to sit up, and when she did, he wrapped the heavy hide around her shoulders, layering it over her existing covers. His hands were careful, never lingering inappropriately, but there was a gentleness to the gesture that made Emma's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she whispered in Lakota, her voice barely audible over the wind. Dakota's eyes met hers in the firelight, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something there beyond the emptiness. Pain, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like concern. He returned to his side of the teepee without a word, but Emma felt warmer than she had in weeks, and it had nothing to do with the extra buffalo robe. The next morning brought a break in the weather, and Emma ventured out to help Winona gather firewood from the stores near the edge of camp. The older woman had become something of a friend, her kind nature transcending the language barrier that still sometimes frustrated their conversations. "Lakota is good man," Winona said as they worked, her English improving from their regular interactions. "His heart was broken when Ayana died. She was beautiful, full of light and laughter. When she died trying to bring their son into the world, and the baby died too. Something in Lakota died also. He stopped speaking that day. The medicine woman said his spirit went to be with them, left only his body behind." Emma felt a pang of sympathy so sharp it surprised her. She had been so focused on her own loss, her own pain at being taken from everything she knew, that she hadn't truly considered what Lakota had endured. To lose both wife and child in one terrible moment, to be left alone with grief so profound it stole your very voice. "How long ago?" Emma asked quietly, stacking wood in her arms. "2 winters before you came," Winona replied. Chief Mapia worried. He thought maybe giving Lakota a new wife would bring him back to the living. But I see how Lakota looks at you when he thinks no one watches. He is afraid." "Afraid?" Emma turned to face the older woman. "Afraid of what?" Winona smiled sadly. "Afraid to feel again. Afraid to open his heart and risk the pain of losing someone else. It is easier to remain silent, to keep everyone at distance. But I see small changes. The way he makes sure you are warm, the way he brought you the best parts of his last hunt, the way his eyes follow you when you move through the camp. His heart is waking up, even if he wishes it would stay asleep." Emma absorbed this information in silence, her mind racing. She had been so focused on her own captivity, her own desire for freedom, that she hadn't considered the complexity of Dakota's situation. He hadn't wanted her any more than she had wanted to be here. They were both prisoners in their own way, trapped by circumstances neither had chosen. That evening, Emma made a decision. She prepared their meal with extra care, using herbs Winona had taught her to gather, making the stew richer and more flavorful than usual. When Lakota returned from checking the horse herd, she had everything ready, the teepee warm and inviting. He paused at the entrance, taking in the scene with those unreadable dark eyes. Emma gestured for him to sit, her heart pounding with nervousness. This was the first time she had actively tried to create something pleasant for him, rather than simply going through the motions of survival. Lakota lowered himself to sit across the fire from her, accepting the bowl she offered. As he ate, Emma gathered her courage and began to speak in a mixture of Lakota and English, her voice soft but steady. "Winona told me about Ayanna," she said, watching his face carefully. "About your son. I am sorry for your loss. I lost my mother 2 years ago, and then my father when your people attacked our wagon train. I know the pain of losing those you love. I know how it feels like your heart has been torn from your chest." Dakota's hand tightened on his bowl, his jaw clenching. For a moment, Emma thought he might stand and leave, might retreat back into his silence. But instead, he remained seated, his eyes fixed on the fire between them. "I did not choose to come here," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "And I know you did not choose to have me as your wife. But we are both here now, both trying to survive, both carrying pain that sometimes feels too heavy to bear. Maybe instead of being strangers sharing a teepee, we could try to be friends. Maybe we could help each other carry the weight." The silence that followed was different from the usual void between them. It felt charged, alive with possibility. Dakota set down his bowl and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since that initial night. Emma saw the war playing out behind his eyes, the desire to protect himself warring with something else, something that looked like longing. Then, slowly, deliberately, Dakota nodded. It was a small gesture, but to Emma it felt like the breaking of a dam. She smiled, and though he didn't return it, she saw his shoulders relax fractionally, saw some of the tension leave his frame. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Dakota still didn't speak, but he began to communicate in other ways. He brought her small gifts from his hunts, the best cuts of meat, a fox pelt that was exceptionally soft. He showed her how to identify animal tracks in the snow, how to predict the weather by watching the sky and the behavior of birds. He taught her to ride his horse, his strong hands steadying her until she found her balance. Emma found herself looking forward to his returns to their teepee, to the quiet evenings they spent together. She talked enough for both of them, telling him stories of her life in Boston, her mother's kindness, her dreams of what she had hoped to find in Oregon. Dakota listened, his attention complete and unwavering, and sometimes she would catch an expression on his face that suggested he understood more than just her words. One night, a commotion outside their teepee jolted them both awake. Dakota was on his feet instantly, grabbing his weapons. Emma followed him outside to find the camp in an uproar. A group of warriors had returned with news that a cavalry unit was approaching, likely looking for the white captives taken months ago. Chief Mapia called a council, and though women were not usually included, Emma stood at the edge with the other captive women, trying to understand what was being decided. The debate was heated, voices raised in argument. Some warriors wanted to fight, others suggested moving the camp to more defensible ground, and still others proposed negotiating with the soldiers. Emma's heart was torn. Part of her, the part that still dreamed of her old life, wanted to run toward the cavalry to beg for rescue, but another part, a part that had grown stronger over the past months, knew that such a confrontation would likely end in bloodshed. She had seen enough death, and the thought of Dakota being killed by soldiers made her chest constrict with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. The council decided to send scouts to assess the cavalry's intentions, while the women and children prepared to evacuate if necessary. Dakota was chosen as one of the scouts, his skills as a warrior making him invaluable. Before he left, he came to Emma, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. She understood what he wasn't saying. He was asking if she would run, if she would try to reach the soldiers while he was gone. Emma reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand on his arm. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him. "I will be here when you return," she said in Lakota, her voice firm with conviction. "I promise." Something flickered in Dakota's eyes, something that looked like relief mixed with wonder. He covered her hand with his own for just a moment, the warmth of his palm seeping into her skin, and then he was gone, melting into the darkness with the other scouts. The wait was agonizing. Emma helped the other women pack essential supplies and prepare the children for possible evacuation, but her mind was elsewhere, following Dakota through the darkness, praying to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore that he would return safely. Dawn broke cold and gray over the camp, But there was no sign of the scouts returning. Emma stood outside the teepee, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill, her eyes scanning the horizon for any movement. The other women moved quietly through their morning tasks, the usual sounds of children playing noticeably absent, as mothers kept their little ones close and quiet. Winona approached, placing a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "Lakota is strongest warrior in our tribe," she said softly. "He will return." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. When had this happened? When had her concern for Lakota shifted from the cautious tolerance of a captive to something deeper, something that made her heart ache with worry? She thought back over the past months, remembering small moments. The way his eyes softened when she laughed at something Winona said. How he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger. The night he had given her his own food when supplies ran low, claiming through gestures that he wasn't hungry, though she knew it was a lie. The sun had climbed halfway to its peak when the scouts finally appeared on the horizon. Emma's heart leaped as she recognized Lakota's powerful form on his horse, and she had to restrain herself from running toward him like some lovesick girl. The scouts rode directly to Chief Mapia's teepee, and soon the council was reconvened. This time Emma was surprised when Lakota emerged and gestured for her to come. She followed him to the council circle, aware of the eyes watching her, some curious, others hostile. Chief Mapia regarded her with his wise, weathered face, and then began to speak. "The cavalry captain wishes to speak with the white women," he said in English for Emma's benefit. "He says they have families looking for them. He promises no violence if we allow him to talk with captives, to see if any wish to return. Lakota suggested we allow this, that we let you choose." Emma's eyes flew to Lakota, who stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable as always. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was giving her a choice, even though it might mean losing her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "When?" she managed to ask. "Tomorrow at midday. Neutral ground between our camp and theirs. You and other white women will meet with Captain. You will tell him what you wish. If you want to go, you go. If you want to stay, you stay. This is fair way." That night, Emma barely slept. She lay on her robes, staring at the smoke hole in the center of the teepee, watching the stars visible through the opening. Across the fire, Lakota was equally wakeful. She could hear the change in his breathing, knew he was as restless as she was. "Lakota," she said softly into the darkness, using his name for the first time. She heard him shift, knew he was listening. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand, even if you cannot respond." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When I first came here, I was terrified. I hated this place, hated being forced into a marriage I didn't choose, hated feeling powerless and alone. I dreamed every night of escape, of finding my way back to the world I knew. But that world is gone now. My father is dead. My mother died years ago. I have no siblings, no family waiting for me in Boston or anywhere else. The life I knew exists only in my memories." Emma sat up, pulling the buffalo robe around her shoulders. In the dim glow of the dying fire, she could see Lakota's silhouette, could see that he had risen as well, sitting with his attention fully focused on her. "But something happened that I didn't expect," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I found a new life here. I found Winona and the other women who taught me their ways. I found a community, even if I don't fully belong to it yet. And I found you." She paused, her heart hammering. "You, who never forced yourself on me, who treated me with respect even when you didn't have to. You who showed me kindness in small ways, who protected me and provided for me and asked nothing in return. You whose silence I have come to understand better than some people's words. Your grief, your pain, your slow healing, I see it all and it matters to me. You matter to me." Lakota remained motionless, but Emma could feel the intensity of his focus, could sense that every word was landing like an arrow in his heart. "Tomorrow, when I meet with the cavalry captain, I will tell him that I choose to stay. Not because I'm forced to, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. Here with you, if you'll have me. Not as a replacement for Ayanna. I could never be that and wouldn't try. But as myself, as Emma, as someone who has come to care for you more deeply than I thought possible." The silence that followed was absolute. Emma held her breath, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake, if she had exposed her heart only to have it rejected. Then Lakota moved, rising to his feet and crossing the small space between them. He knelt before her, and in the firelight Emma saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Slowly, as if the movement cost him everything, Lakota raised his hand and cupped her face, his palm rough but gentle against her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and Emma leaned into the touch, her own eyes filling with tears. Then, for the first time since she had known him, Lakota spoke. His voice was rough from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but to Emma it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Stay," he said in English, the single word carrying the weight of all his longing, all his fear, all his hope. "Please stay." Emma's tears spilled over as she covered his hand with her own. "I will," she promised. "I will stay." Lakota pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Emma wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, feeling the strength of him, the warmth, the steady beat of his heart against her chest. They stayed that way for a long time, two wounded souls finding comfort and healing in each other's embrace. When they finally drew apart, Lakota reached up and carefully removed the leather cord that held his medicine pouch around his neck. Emma had seen him wear it every day, had understood it held something deeply important to him. He opened it with reverent fingers and withdrew a small, delicately carved wooden bird. "I made this for my son," he said, his voice still rough but growing stronger with each word. "Before he was born. I thought I would never give it to anyone, would carry it always as reminder of what I lost. But Ayanna would not want me to live in past forever. She would want me to live again, to love again." He pressed the carving into Emma's hand, closing her fingers around it. "This is my promise to you. I will speak again. I will live again. I will love again if you teach me how." Emma looked down at the tiny bird, so beautifully crafted, each feather visible in the wood. The fact that he was giving her something so precious, something that represented both his greatest loss and his willingness to move forward, overwhelmed her with emotion. "We'll teach each other," she said, smiling through her tears. "We'll both learn how to live and love again, together." Lakota smiled then, a real smile that transformed his handsome face, making him look younger, lighter, like a man emerging from a long darkness into sunlight. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy and affection that Emma had seen other couples in the tribe share. "My heart was dead," he whispered. "You brought it back to life. You are my second chance, my gift from the spirits. I do not deserve you, but I will spend rest of my life trying to be worthy of the choice you have made." "You already are," Emma assured him, reaching up to run her fingers through his long black hair. "You have been kind when you could have been cruel, gentle when you could have been harsh, patient when you could have been demanding. You gave me time to heal, time to adjust, time to find my own way here. You respected me when others might not have. That is more than worthy, Lakota. That is exceptional." The next day, Emma rode out with the other captive women to meet the cavalry captain at the designated neutral ground. Captain Morrison was a young officer with sincere eyes and a genuine desire to help. He spoke with each woman individually, offering them safe passage back to civilization, promising to help them reconnect with any surviving family, assuring them that they would be treated with respect and compassion. Two of the younger women, girls really, barely 16, chose to return. They had been in the camp only a few weeks and hadn't yet adapted to the harsh realities of Plains life. Emma hugged them both, wishing them well, hoping they would find peace and happiness wherever they ended up. But when Captain Morrison turned to Emma, she met his gaze steadily and said, "I choose to stay. This is my home now, and Lakota is my husband, not by force, but by choice. I ask that you respect that decision and leave us in peace." The captain looked surprised, but also relieved. "Ma'am, I have to ask, are you under any duress? Are you being threatened or coerced in any way?" Emma glanced back at where Lakota sat on his horse with the other Lakota warriors, his eyes locked on her. She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "No, Captain. I'm exactly where I want to be." Captain Morrison nodded slowly. "Then I wish you well, ma'am. Truly." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, I've been on this frontier long enough to know that sometimes home isn't where you started, but where your heart finds peace. I hope you found that." "I have," Emma said with certainty. "I truly have." The exchange was completed peacefully, the two young women departing with the cavalry while Emma and one other woman who had also chosen to stay returned to the Lakota camp. As soon as they were back, Dakota dismounted and came to Emma, helping her down from her horse with hands that lingered at her waist. "You came back," he said, and though he had spoken the night before, hearing his voice again still sent a thrill through her. "I told you I would," Emma replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I keep my promises." That evening, Chief Mapia called the tribe together for a celebration. The threat of violence had passed, and two members of their community had made commitments that deserved recognition. Emma learned that she and the other woman who had stayed would undergo a formal adoption ceremony, making them true members of the tribe, not just captives or outsiders. The ceremony was beautiful and moving, full of ritual and meaning that Emma was only beginning to understand. But the most powerful moment came when Chief Mapia spoke directly to her and Dakota, blessing their union anew, this time as a true marriage of choice and love, rather than necessity and tradition. "Dakota has been silent for 2 winters, the chief said to the assembled tribe. His grief stole his voice and darkened his spirit. But this woman, this Emma who came to us from the white world, she has brought him back to us. She has proven that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that new beginnings are possible even after greatest losses. They have both chosen this path, chosen each other, and we honor that choice." The tribe erupted in celebration, drums beating, voices raised in song. Emma found herself pulled into dances she didn't know, taught steps by laughing women who had once regarded her with suspicion, but now welcomed her as one of their own. Winona hugged her tightly, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. But through it all, Emma's eyes kept finding Dakota, and his eyes kept finding her. When the formal ceremonies concluded, and the celebration moved into its more relaxed phase, Dakota took her hand and led her away from the crowd, back to their teepee. Inside, away from the noise and commotion, Dakota pulled Emma into his arms and held her close. "I was so afraid," he admitted, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Afraid you would leave. Afraid I would lose someone I loved again. Afraid to hope that happiness was possible for me. But you stayed. You chose me. Chose this life, even when you could have left." Emma pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I chose you because you're worth choosing, Dakota. Because in your silence I found more honesty than in 1,000 empty words. Because in your grief I recognized my own pain and saw how we could heal each other. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being captivity and became home, and you stopped being my captor and became the man I love." "I love you too," Dakota said, the words seeming to surprise him even as he spoke them. "I thought I would never say those words again, never feel this way again. But you have awakened something in me I thought was dead forever. You have given me a future worth living for." He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with growing passion as months of restrained emotion finally found expression. Emma responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his. This was nothing like the forced union she had feared on that first terrible night. This was choice. This was desire. This was love freely given and joyfully received. They made love with the tenderness of new lovers and the passion of souls long denied connection. Dakota worshipped Emma's body with reverent hands, speaking words of love and devotion in both Lakota and English, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each declaration. Emma discovered that beneath his stoic exterior lived a man of deep feeling and profound capacity for love, a man who had been waiting for someone to reach past his defenses and touch his wounded heart. Afterwards, they lay tangled together beneath the buffalo robes, the sounds of continued celebration drifting in from outside. Emma traced patterns on Dakota's chest, marveling at how her life had transformed so completely. "Tell me about Ayanna," she said softly. "I want to know about her. About the woman who held your heart before me. I'm not threatened by your past, Lakota. It made you who you are." Lakota was quiet for a moment, then began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of memory but without the sharp edge of pain that had once accompanied any thought of his lost wife. He told Emma about Ayana's laugh, her skill with beadwork, the way she could calm frightened horses with just her voice. He spoke of their courtship, their wedding, their joy when they learned a child was coming, and he spoke of the terrible day he lost them both, the day his voice had died with them. "But you taught me something important," Lakota said, pulling Emma closer. "You taught me that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone old. My love for Ayana will always be part of me, but it doesn't make my love for you any less real or true. My heart is big enough for both, and Ayana would be happy knowing I found love again." Emma kissed him softly. "Thank you for sharing that with me, and thank you for being patient while I found my way to you." "Thank you for choosing to stay," Lakota replied, "for seeing past the warrior who captured you to the man underneath, for giving me reason to speak again, to live again, to love again." As winter deepened around them, Emma and Lakota built a life together that was rich with love, laughter, and the daily rhythms of tribal existence. Lakota taught Emma to hunt and track, to read the land and sky. Emma taught Lakota to read the English book she had salvaged from the wagon train attack, opening new worlds of knowledge to him. They talked for hours, making up for the months of silence, sharing their thoughts, dreams, fears, and hopes. Winona became not just a friend but a surrogate mother to Emma, teaching her the deeper mysteries of Lakota medicine and spirituality. Chief Mapia watched his nephew's transformation with satisfaction, pleased to see the young warrior he had worried about finally finding peace and purpose again. When spring arrived, bringing green grass and warm winds to the plains, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told Lakota one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, joy and fear and wonder all playing across his expressive face as he placed his hand reverently on her still flat belly. "I am afraid," he admitted. "After what happened with Ayana." "I know," Emma said, covering his hand with hers. "But we are not Ayana and your first son. We are us, and our story will be different. Have faith, Lakota. Have hope. We have come so far already. We will face this together too." And they did. When Emma's time came that autumn, Winona and the other medicine women attended her, their skill and experience guiding the birth safely. Lakota waited outside the birthing teepee, pacing like a caged wolf, his newly restored voice raised in prayers to every spirit he could name. When the sharp cry of a newborn finally split the air, Lakota burst through the entrance to find Emma exhausted but smiling, holding a squalling infant with a shock of dark hair and lungs that promised years of healthy crying. Their son, perfect and beautiful and alive. "He is strong," Emma said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Like his father." Lakota knelt beside them, his own face wet with tears as he looked at his son. This child he had never dared hope for, this symbol of new beginnings and second chances. He touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when strong fingers wrapped around his own. "We will call him Kohana," Lakota said, his voice thick with emotion. "It means swift. May he move swiftly through life. May he outrun the sorrows that once caught his father. May he know only joy and love." Emma smiled. "Kohana. It's perfect." As the years passed, Emma and Lakota's love only deepened. They had 2 more children, daughters who inherited Emma's green eyes and Lakota's strong spirit. The family became a cornerstone of the tribe, respected and loved by all. Emma never forgot her origins, never stopped being Emma Clark from Boston, but she also became fully Lakota, walking comfortably in both worlds, teaching her children to honor both heritages. Lakota became not just a warrior, but also a diplomat, his command of English making him valuable in negotiations with settlers and soldiers. His voice, once lost to grief, became a voice of wisdom and peace, helping to forge understanding between his people and the encroaching white world. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the camp was peaceful, Emma and Lakota would sit together outside their teepee, watching the stars wheel overhead. Sometimes they would talk about the journey that brought them together, marveling at how much had changed since that violent day on the plains. "Do you ever regret it?" Dakota asked one night. "Staying when you could have left?" Emma looked at her husband, at the handsome face she had come to love so deeply, at the gentle hands that held hers, at the eyes that looked at her with devotion and adoration. She thought of their children sleeping peacefully nearby, of the life they had built together, of the love that had grown from the ashes of loss and fear. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. You are my home, Dakota. You and our children, this tribe, this life. It's not the life I expected, but it's the life I was meant for, and I wouldn't change a single thing." Dakota pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Emma. You saved me from the darkness. You gave me back my voice, my life, my heart. Everything good in my world exists because you chose to stay. And I love you," Emma replied, snuggling into his embrace. "My silent warrior who found his voice again. My captor who became my partner. My husband who is my home." They sat together in the peaceful darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, together over apart. Their story, which had begun with violence and sorrow, had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the healing power of love and the strength of the human spirit. And in the teepee behind them, the small wooden bird Dakota had once carved for his lost son sat on a place of honor, a symbol not of what was lost, but of what had been found, a reminder that even from the deepest grief, new joy could grow, new love could flourish, new life could begin.